I wasn't planning to say anything that night. I had debated for hours whether to bring the envelope. The property tax notice wasn't urgent, just a little confusing, but I'd always handled those things with Harold. He used to read through every line, nodding like a judge before passing it to me, with a half joke. No surprises this time, Viv. It was our rhythm. My memory, his logic. But since he passed 6 months ago, I've been a metronome with no tempo to match. So when Marcus called, excited for his 40th birthday party at that rented rooftop restaurant with faux brick walls and overpriced tapas, I tucked the envelope into my purse. Just in case. Not to be a bird, not to make it about me, as Jessica once hissed under her breath during the funeral reception. I just thought maybe Marcus could glance over it. I don't know why I believed the old Marcus might show up. The restaurant was loud, glittery, with artificial charm. It had one of those ring lights in the corner for selfie stations, and Jessica had positioned herself near it all night. Her lipstick matched the balloons. I sat at the edge of the long table, the kind reserved for family, but far enough from the center of laughter to remind you where you ranked. Marcus raised his glass to toast himself. Jessica clapped like a pageant winner. I smiled, then looked down at the envelope, fingering the edge. It wasn't thick, just 3 pages. A few numbers I wasn't sure about. I leaned toward Marcus between courses, speaking softly so no one else would hear. "Sweetheart," I said, "do you mind taking a look at this when you have a moment? I think I misunderstood something on the—" Jessica's voice cut across the clatter of silverware. "Oh God, here we go again." She didn't even turn her head. "Mom, you're always creating drama. Just say what you want already. Honestly, you've been dying for attention since Harold passed." The room didn't go silent. Not really, but it changed. The laughter didn't stop. It just shifted, 1 seat further away from me. Marcus didn't wince. He didn't laugh either. He just reached over and patted my shoulder like I was a piece of furniture that needed dusting. "Mom, Jessica's right," he said lightly, almost affectionately. "You've handled bills for decades. You don't need our help. You're just a little lonely. That's all." I stared at his hand resting on my shoulder. It was heavier than it looked. He pulled it back before I could say anything. I folded the envelope in half and slid it back into my purse. I nodded, but didn't smile. I just needed a moment. I excused myself to the restroom and sat in the stall longer than necessary. I didn't cry. That's not my way. But I did look at myself in the mirror. Really look. The woman staring back wore a sage green shawl over a modest black blouse, hair pinned half up in the same twist. Harold used to say made me look book club sharp. I'd chosen it because it made me feel anchored. Now it just felt accurate, bound, tied. When I returned, no one noticed. Jessica was filming a boomerang of the birthday cake sparkler. Marcus was showing someone the renovation photos of their new kitchen. My place, by comparison, probably looked embarrassing. I didn't stay for dessert. As I stood to leave, I passed Jessica's friend, a woman whose name I never caught, but who once asked me at Thanksgiving if I still used paper checkbooks, and she leaned toward the woman beside her. "She's probably going to forget to pay her bills next," she whispered with a smirk. "So they have to rescue her." Classic attention-seeking behavior. It landed like glass in my ear. I drove home in silence. Windows rolled halfway down to keep myself alert. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. At every red light, I wanted so badly for Harold to be in his chair when I walked in. To say something dumb and warm, like "looks like you survived the influencers." But the chair was empty, the mug on the side table dusty, the air holding only quiet and time. I made tea out of habit. Didn't drink it. I stood in the doorway of Harold's study, thinking maybe I should clean it out, maybe it was time. But when I opened the cabinet drawer, the one with his labeled folders, I felt something shift beneath the papers. A yellow post-it stuck to a manila envelope. In case I don't get the chance to explain. I sat on the carpet, cross-legged like a child, and opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, Harold's favorite format. Tidy lines, perfectly tabbed pages with labels like LLC1, Caraway Holdings, Custodial Roth IRA, Emma, and a tab titled simply Marcus Loan. My eyes, trained by decades of bookkeeping, picked up the patterns quickly. 3 rental properties, under an LLC. A diversified stock portfolio. 2 CDs, about to mature, and a formal promissory note signed by Marcus in blue ink for $400,000, unpaid, unacknowledged. There was also a letter, handwritten. Viv, I wanted to surprise you. You always said money didn't matter, but I wanted you to feel safe. Always. This is yours now. Use it however you see fit. One last thing, if Marcus ever forgets how much we did for him, remind him. Not with guilt, but with numbers. You were always better with numbers. I sat there for a long time, the weight of his words pinning me to the rug. I wasn't losing it. I wasn't seeking attention. I was sitting on a fortune, a secret, and a betrayal. And someone was going to answer for it. Harold never missed decimal points. He once found a 0.138 discrepancy in a year-end ledger for our homeowners association and wouldn't rest until it was traced to a misgate lunch receipt. I used to tease him for being obsessive. Now, staring at his perfectly aligned spreadsheets, I saw what I had mistaken for fastidiousness was actually foresight. He had been building a safety net in the shadows, but what gripped me more than the real estate, stocks, or even the shocking promissory note was his letter. His tone wasn't pleading or sentimental. It was confident. He had trusted me to find this when the time was right, and more importantly, he trusted I'd know what to do. I stayed up until nearly 2 a.m. that night, sorting through files. Each folder unlocked something: a property deed tucked behind tax returns, notes about rental income, copies of checks to Marcus dated, annotated, and labeled bridge assistance, seed round, and one painfully specific, final help. If he fails, let it be his lesson. The next morning, I skipped my usual tea and instead dug through my small metal lockbox for the thumb drive I'd used when I handled community audit reports. I hadn't plugged it into my laptop in years. Dust had settled into its groove, but it came alive with a blink, and I started building what Harold had hinted at: a financial timeline, layered with transfers, property values, and a running total of what Marcus owed, not just in dollars, but in dignity. I needed professional eyes. I remembered the name immediately. Patricia Hernandez. She was Harold's recommendation during a neighbor's will dispute years ago. She could spot fraud from orbit, he'd said, and wouldn't blink while slicing through it. It took 3 phone calls and a week to get an appointment. During that time, I kept my routine deliberate, shopping, walking, checking the mailbox like nothing had changed. But at night, I rehearsed what I would say to Patricia. I wasn't looking for revenge. I reminded myself I was looking for truth and accountability. When I stepped into her office, Patricia greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't skim past me like a tired elder. She gestured to a leather chair in her sunlit meeting room and waited for me to unpack the stack of folders, USB drives, and the original handwritten letter. "I'm Vivian Chen," I began. "I'm not here because I'm grieving poorly. I'm here because I found evidence of something my husband left behind: assets, instructions, and a debt." I watched her as she skimmed, her brow furrowing as numbers aligned. "Mrs. Chen," she said after a long pause, closing one folder, "do you realize what you have here?" I nodded. "This isn't just passive inheritance. Your husband structured an estate, and your son has likely committed civil fraud by misrepresenting loan obligations for personal and business gain." She leaned back and tapped her pen. "And you, far from seeking attention, need immediate legal protection." It was the first time since Harold's death I felt like someone saw me without pity or dismissal. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked. "I want it corrected," I said quietly. "With documentation. I don't want to yell. I don't want to make a scene. I want this to be professional and complete." She smiled, a small, sharp expression. "Then we'll treat this like any other case of financial misappropriation, with a timeline, witnesses if needed, and evidence, which you already have in abundance." For the next 2 hours, we worked. She made copies. Her assistant scanned every page. Patricia asked smart, pointed questions, not about my emotions, but about the facts. Every time I answered, I felt a little stronger. Near the end of the meeting, Patricia tapped the promissory note Marcus had signed. "This is binding. Add in interest over 5 years, and he owes roughly $5,457. That's before we factor in misuse of estate funds, especially if those assets were used to secure personal loans." I kept my hands folded in my lap. My pulse didn't rise. I didn't blink. "Are you comfortable serving him?" she asked gently. I paused. "He humiliated me," I said. In front of family, he made me feel small when I was vulnerable, so yes, I can serve him, quietly, professionally, and I will not be guilted for doing so. She nodded, with approval. As I stood to leave, Patricia walked me out herself. I have a feeling, she said, that when your son sees the envelope, he won't think you're seeking attention anymore. I looked back at her. No, I said, because this time the attention will be his to explain. I drove home with the windows up. The silence in the car wasn't lonely. It was clean. I parked in the driveway and stayed in the seat for a moment, staring at the familiar hedges Harold used to trim every Sunday. The house didn't look different, but I knew something foundational had shifted. Inside, I placed the red stamped envelope from Patricia's office at the center of the kitchen table, not as a threat. As a reminder, I made myself tea and stood by the window, watching the steam curl upward like a signal to no one in particular. Later that evening, I opened a new ledger on my laptop, titled Vivian Chen, Executor, and wrote one line at the top. Respect is not inherited, it is enforced by memory and math. Marcus didn't call when he received the envelope. He texted, "Marcus, what is this crap, Mom? Some kind of mistake?" I stared at my phone for a full minute before locking the screen and setting it face down on the table. Mistake? As if my request for repayment rooted in law, backed by documents signed in his own hand, was a typo. As if I had tripped into Patricia's office, spilled tea on the promissory note, and stumbled into a lawsuit. I went to the sink, rinsed a cup, and watched a pair of robins picking at the bird feeder Harold had installed before his last winter. They were efficient, focused, no noise, no drama, just motion, and The phone buzzed again. "Marcus, you're overreacting. We're family. You want to humiliate me? You've made your point." He still didn't understand. This wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't even about money anymore. I didn't reply. Instead, I returned to my growing spreadsheet, now color-coded by legal category, estate assets, loan agreements, unauthorized withdrawals. Every number a memory. Every cell a scar. By the third day, Jessica called. I expected a performance. What I got was worse. Something rehearsed, but faintly desperate. "Vivian," she began, feigning warmth, "we're just a little surprised. This all feels so sudden. Why didn't you talk to us first?" I paused, then asked evenly, "When was the last time you listened when I tried?" Silence. Then, in a clipped tone, "I know you're upset. We all are. But this? Legal threats? That's not the Vivian I know." I glanced at Harold's picture on the bookshelf. "No," I said. "It's the one you never bothered to see." Jessica tried to pivot. She mentioned optics, reputation, and what people might think. Her voice turned defensive. "Tight. You're painting us as thieves," she snapped. "You'll destroy everything we've built. Marcus will lose the business. Our house is tied to—" I cut in. "So was my name, on every account, every check, and no one seemed worried about destroying me." Her voice faltered. "This isn't you. It is now." And I hung up. That weekend, I opened the mail to find a thin, glossy postcard from Marcus's business, an announcement for a new product launch. His signature was embossed in gold foil. The logo looked sleek, expensive. I ran my fingers over the raised ink and exhaled through my nose. He had used Harold's money to fund this company, marketed it as self-built in interviews, lied to banks, posted inspirational quotes about legacy while quietly draining mine. They were right about one thing. I had been quiet too long. I walked to the den and pulled out the accordion file of bank statements. I had marked inconsistencies with red tabs. Harold had paid a large lump sum into Marcus's account the year before his stroke. Jessica's boutique, despite claiming to be independent, showed startup funds traced back to a rental property liquidation. Each lie had a trail, and I followed every step of it. By Monday, Patricia's forensic accountant had finished her preliminary review. "You were smart to organize this," she told me over the phone. "We've already identified 3 potential areas for litigation: misrepresentation, misuse of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty." "Will they lose the house?" I asked. "If they fight it? Possibly. But if they settle," she hesitated, "we could structure something that gives you authority over the assets without eviction." I nodded slowly. I didn't want them homeless. I wanted them accountable. For the first time, I understood the difference. The next evening, I received a voicemail. Marcus, strained, angry. This is going to destroy our family. Do you want that? Are you really doing this because of one stupid party? Because Jessica said something dumb? You're going nuclear because your feelings got hurt. He paused. You always were sensitive. That word scraped something raw. I thought about the holidays I'd cooked for, the nights I sat by their kids' beds when they were sick, the cash slipped into birthday cards without fanfare. I thought about the way Marcus used to grab my hand at movie theaters when he was little, scared of explosions on screen. I thought about how he forgot my anniversary last year. And then I thought about his house, renovated with money from a man he buried without acknowledgement. On Thursday, I drove to the east side of town. One of the LLC properties was there, a modest duplex in a quiet cul-de-sac. It had been under Harold's name for years, rented to a quiet couple who paid in cash. I hadn't visited since he passed. I knocked on the front door. A middle-aged man answered, blinking in surprise. Miss Chen? Yes, I said gently. I'm just checking in. My husband used to manage this property. His face softened. He was a good landlord, honest. I'd like to keep it that way. We spoke for 15 minutes. I promised the rent would stay the same. No sudden changes. The man, grateful, shook my hand. You're not like most landlords, he said. No, I replied. I'm not. When I returned home, I opened a fresh file. Restructure plan, estate oversight, Vivian Chen. I typed the first line. Stewardship is not vengeance, it is restoration. I didn't hear from Marcus for 5 days after that. Then came the knock. Not a phone call, not a text. A knock. I stood in my hallway for a moment, staring at the door, heart strangely still. Then I opened it. He looked tired, dressed in yesterday's shirt. No smile. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside, saying nothing. Letting silence do what words never could. Marcus stood just beyond the threshold, hands in his jacket pockets, as if unsure whether to enter or bolt. I didn't speak. Not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing rehearsed. When he finally stepped inside, the air shifted, heavy, unsure. He walked like a man entering someone else's home, not the one he once took his first steps in. I motioned toward the kitchen. It wasn't an invitation, just a direction. He followed. The kettle hissed faintly on the stove. I hadn't planned to make tea, but something about the ritual gave my hands purpose. I didn't ask if he wanted any. He sat at the table, the same seat Harold used to occupy. That, more than anything, told me he didn't understand the stakes yet. I read the documents, Marcus said after a moment. I poured the hot water slowly. All of them? Enough, he muttered. Jessica, she's a wreck. She should be. He blinked. I watched his jaw tighten, but he didn't bite back. You're seriously going through with this? I placed my mug on a cork coaster and sat across from him. This isn't performance, it's process. Legal, necessary, and long overdue. You know this could ruin me. I tilted my head. You mean it might hold you accountable? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, something he'd done as a child when caught lying about broken things. Vases, rules, promises. It was never meant to go this far, he said. The business. It started slow. Jessica needed help getting the store launched. I thought we'd make it up to Dad eventually, but then he died, I finished for him. And you hoped I wouldn't know what he did for you. He looked away. We didn't think it'd matter. That stung. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd been circling for weeks. I had become invisible, long before the lawsuit. Marcus took a breath and softened his voice. Why didn't you just call? Talk to me before all this. You never made room for listening, I said. You made a public scene. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone, and then brushed it off, like I was a moody child. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You were counting on me staying small. He looked down at the table. I could see the tremor in his fingers, faint. But it wasn't guilt, it was panic. I can't pay it all back, Mom. Not now. The company's not liquid. And our house is collateral, I said. I know. What do you want from me? He asked, exasperated. An apology? A press release? Public shame? I want a signed agreement. Structured repayment. Legal clarity. He blinked. You want to own me? I want to stop being erased. Silence stretched between us like a frayed rope, tense. fraying, ready to snap. I let it hold. He leaned forward, tone suddenly low. Jessica thinks you're doing this to teach us a lesson. I'm doing this so your daughter learns a different one. Marcus's brow furrowed. Emma? Yes, I said, because someday she'll wonder why her grandmother vanished from every family photo and memory. And when she does, I want her to see I left because I deserved better, not because I was bitter. He stared at me for a long time. Dad really left all that to you? No, I said, he left it to us. But you forfeited your part the moment you tried to bury it. Marcus exhaled shakily. He looked older than 40 today. Not from stress, but from fear of not being the golden son anymore. I reached beneath the table and pulled out a slim blue folder. I had Patricia draft an alternate agreement. It avoids court, but you'll relinquish control of the business. I'll hold a majority stake until the debt's repaid. You'll still operate it, but under oversight. You'll return title to the property Jessica used as leverage, and the LLC revenue streams will remain in estate control. He looked like I'd handed him a bomb. If you refuse, I added, we go to court and you'll lose more than just ownership. You'll lose the illusion. He didn't open the folder. He just nodded, slowly. What happens if I agree? He asked, eyes not meeting mine. You get to rebuild, I said, but this time, with truth. He stood up, folder in hand, and hesitated. You were always good at math, he muttered. I just didn't think you'd turn it on us. I didn't, I said. You made the numbers speak for themselves. He left without finishing the tea. I didn't watch him go. That night, I pulled out one of Harold's old ledgers, one I'd never touched since he passed. Inside were notations, dates, even small quotes scribbled in the margins. On one page, in his sharp, blocky handwriting, he'd written, "Don't protect them from consequences. That's not love. That's sabotage." Below it was a check copy made out to Marcus, dated 3 months before the stroke. I closed the book, gently. It wasn't vengeance I was pursuing, it was correction. An old bookkeeper's instinct, a widow's right. The next morning, Patricia called. He signed the alternate agreement, she said. We'll notarize next week. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. Instead, I looked out the window, where the robins had returned. And for once, I wasn't looking for anything. I was simply seeing things as they were. The morning after Marcus signed the agreement, I woke before the sun. Not out of nerves, I just wanted to see the house in the dark one more time, the way Harold used to love it, the hour before light, where everything felt paused. When the world hadn't made up its mind yet. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in my shawl, and stood by the window as the robins returned, like they always did, persistent and indifferent. I wasn't waiting for anything, just observing, like Harold had taught me. Let the room settle before you speak, he'd say. Most people miss the truth by talking too soon. The legal work was far from finished, but the core had been secured. I had control of Marcus's business equity, oversight of the LLC assets, and a signed agreement that put everything in black and white. Jessica hadn't called. She hadn't needed to. Her silence said more than any apology ever would. That was the problem with people like her. Convinced that loudness was strength, that stillness was surrender. What she didn't understand, and probably never would, is that quiet is where everything begins. Especially power. After breakfast, I took the long drive out to Maple Hollow. It wasn't far, but it felt like another country compared to my small home. Rows of new money disguised as farmhouse charm. Cream-colored stone, lac-trimmed windows, no front porches, just glossy, symmetrical performance. Their house sat near the corner, all angles and glass. Jessica had once described it as minimalist luxury. I always thought it looked like a museum, built for someone who wanted to be remembered but not actually known. I parked across the street and watched it for a moment. Curtains pulled open in every room, as if they feared someone might forget they existed. I stepped out of the car, folder in hand. The final documents needed one more delivery. I didn't ring the bell. I placed the envelope between the door and the frame, exactly like the paper trail they had started with me, quiet, unannounced. But I didn't leave right away. I walked the perimeter of the yard, letting memory fill the gaps. I remembered Emma's 3rd birthday here, where Jessica made a caterer wear gloves to hand out cupcakes. I remembered Harold pretending to lose a bet so Emma could win a $5 bill and beam with pride. I remembered how I'd been placed at the kids' table that day, not for proximity, but because they assumed I wouldn't mind. I did. I just hadn't said so. As I reached the back gate, I noticed something had changed. The garden was gone. Where Jessica once kept raised beds full of herbs, for content, as she used to say, there was now a barren strip of dirt and a broken trellis. The string lights were still hanging, but most were burned out. One even dangled like it had given up trying. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. As I turned to leave, a voice caught me off guard. "Are you here to gloat?" Jessica stood at the side door, arms folded over her chest. Her hair was pulled tight, makeup precise but not fresh. She wore white, always white, but it looked dull today, tired, like it wanted to be something softer and could. "No," I said. "I'm here to finish what you started." She walked toward me, slowly. Her heels didn't match the grass. "You know, he's miserable. He should be." She tilted her head. "And you think that's justice?" "I think it's arithmetic." Jessica narrowed her eyes. "This wasn't your place. None of this. He worked for it. I helped build it. On someone else's foundation," I said. "One you never thanked, just exploited." She laughed bitterly. "You don't get it. You were fine with being invisible as long as you felt useful. The second no one needed you, you snapped." I didn't respond right away. I let her words hover in the air, unchallenged, unvalidated. Then I said, "Needing someone and respecting them aren't the same thing. I was always available, Jessica. You just stopped seeing me." She flinched, not visibly, but internally. I knew the signs. "I'll have the countersigned documents delivered," she said. "We're done, right?" "On paper," I said. "But not in memory." She didn't ask what I meant. She just turned and walked inside, carefully, like the grass might stain her. That night, I opened the door to Harold's study again. It didn't ache this time. I sat at his desk, not to grieve, but to plan. The properties under the LLCs needed updated lease agreements. The business Marcus once called his legacy now required quarterly reports submitted to me. I wasn't micromanaging, I was implementing integrity. Halfway through filing some revised documents, I found a photo in the bottom drawer, Harold holding Emma as a baby, both their eyes squinting from the sun, caught in a laugh. I propped it up near the lamp. Some inheritances are monetary, others are the demand for dignity. That night, I slept with the windows open. The air was cool, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream of being dismissed. The day after I visited their home and left the final envelope behind, I returned to mine with a strange emptiness, not grief, not regret, just space, like air had finally returned to a room I didn't realize had been sealed shut. I watered my plants, turned the cushions on the sofa, even restocked the pantry. It was a Tuesday, but it felt like a beginning. What unsettled me most wasn't Jessica's bitterness or Marcus's avoidance. It was how unsurprising it all felt, as if this betrayal had always been circling, waiting for me to stop believing the best in them. And I had. I truly had. Right up until the silence became the loudest thing in the room. I made a list that afternoon. Chores to anchor me. Reorganize Harold's desk. Review the new property management agreement. Call the plumber about the rusted garden spigot. Simple things. Manageable. Tangible. But when I opened the desk drawer to sort through old envelopes, I found something I hadn't remembered putting there. A worn, yellow-lined notepad. Harold's. The top page read, "Things to tell Viv when I'm ready." My hand froze. The paper felt thinner than I expected, almost like skin. It crinkled beneath my touch as I lifted the cover. Inside were fragments, not full letters, just beginnings. Lists, questions, observations written like footnotes to our marriage. Emma will ask one day. I want Viv to be ready. Marcus never learned to say thank you without a transaction behind it. If I go first, she'll think she failed me. She never did. I blinked, not to cry, but to clear the weight from my lashes. Harold had never been one for flowery language. But here, in these half-finished pages, he had left his heart and data points. Notes for me to decipher. Quiet codes of care. Further down, one line caught me. "She'll do what I couldn't. I just hope they understand when she does." I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. He'd seen it coming. Not the exact betrayal, but the drift. The slow erosion of respect, masked as modernity. The way Marcus had started calling me old school, like it was both compliment and limitation. The way Jessica had replaced conversation with content. Harold hadn't planned on dying so soon. But he had prepared for me. For this. I spent the next few hours cataloging his notes. Not for legal reasons, just to preserve them, because they reminded me that even in silence, he had been watching too. Later that evening, I received an email from Patricia with the subject line, "Settlement confirmed. Agreement executed." No fanfare, no dramatic language, just closure, signed and notarized. I clicked the attached PDF, reading through the structured repayment schedule and final estate transfer terms. It was done. Legally, financially, complete. And yet a strange ache settled in. Because now, there were no next steps. No fire to put out. No insult to metabolize. Just the house. The quiet. My name. On everything. No one to doubt it. I closed my laptop and walked to the shelf where Harold's favorite mystery novels still stood in their original order, alphabetical by author, chronological by publication. He had his systems. I never changed them. On a whim, I pulled down an Agatha Christie, one I hadn't read since before he passed. Inside the cover I found another of his notes, folded neatly between the title page and dedication. Viv, remember, a strong woman is just a quiet one who's been underestimated too long. You taught me that. I just organized the evidence. I sat back down in the armchair and let out a small laugh. The kind that breaks in your throat because it knows it shouldn't sound like joy, but does anyway. That night, I went through the old box of photos in the closet. Not because I needed to feel nostalgic, but because I wanted to see if I could do it without pain. Harold in a flannel jacket, squinting at the sun. Marcus on a tricycle, his helmet too big. Jessica, fresh-faced and wide-eyed before the filters and the branding. Me, with jet black hair in the same twist I still wear now. Time hadn't changed me as much as they thought. If anything, it had refined me. Softened the unnecessary, sharpened the essential. I found a small Polaroid of Emma holding a paper flower she'd made for me during a visit years ago. On the back, she had written in pink marker, "To Nana the smartest lady ever." I placed it beside Harold's ledger on the desk. She may not understand what happened between us now, but one day she might, and when she does, I hope she finds not bitterness, but blueprint. The next morning I made my tea and walked out to the garden. The sun was high already. Bees hovered above the lavender. The hose needed replacing, but the soil was soft again. I knelt down, gloveless, and pushed my fingers into the earth. For no other reason than to remember what it felt like to nurture something without asking for praise. I wasn't a widow fighting back anymore. I was a woman reclaiming her name in the ledger. And that was more than enough. I wasn't expecting visitors that Thursday. The calendar was clear. My list for the day included nothing more complicated than sweeping the porch and rotating the files I'd backed up to my external drive. I had already dusted Harold's shelves and put fresh lemons in the fruit bowl. Not because I needed them, but because I liked how they looked. Simple, round, certain. But just after lunch, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Emma. It wasn't the mail carrier either. It was Linda Tran, from Harold's old bookkeeping group. Her eyes were lined deeper than I remembered. Her blouse buttoned to the collar in a way that always made her look over-prepared, like a school teacher who never quite left the classroom. She clutched a small folder to her chest. "Vivian," she said gently, "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," I replied, stepping aside. "But you are unexpected." "I heard about Marcus," she said once we were seated. She didn't say where she'd heard. She didn't have to. That kind of news moved quietly through community boards and neighborhood whispers, especially when names got involved in legal proceedings. "I'm not ashamed," I said plainly, pouring her tea. "I didn't think you were." She paused as I slid the sugar bowl toward her, then opened the folder she'd brought. Inside were old meeting agendas from the community fund Harold used to help manage, a local grant program for young entrepreneurs. I remembered typing up the very first draft years ago on our kitchen table, back when he still used the word fax without irony. "I was reviewing some records," she said. Harold left notes, personal ones. Not official documents, but observations about applicants, patterns in the funding, people he worried might manipulate the process. She pulled out a sheet with his handwriting in red ink, underlined 3 times. If Marcus applies, treat it like anyone else. Don't let my name cloud the math. I didn't flinch. Did he apply? I asked. She nodded. 3 times. Only once was it approved, and even then, he didn't meet the deliverables. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the heat steady me. Harold had shielded me in life, and again in death, but even he had limits. I used to think, I said softly, that protecting someone meant absorbing their mistakes before the world could see them. Linda looked at me. And now? Now I think protecting them means showing them the mirror and making sure they don't leave until they understand the reflection. We didn't talk much after that. She left the folder with me. For your records, she said. But it felt more like something sacred, evidence of integrity surviving its test. After she left, I took the folder to my study and slid it next to the others. It didn't change the outcome. It didn't reopen the case. But it mattered, because it was truth. Because someone else had seen the same pattern I had, long before the signatures were dry. Later that afternoon, I walked to the community garden. It was only 4 blocks away, nestled between the fire station and the old bakery that had somehow survived the pandemic. I hadn't volunteered there in over a year. Not since Harold fell sick. But the benches still held the indent of our hands from pruning days and herb planting workshops. Our names were on one of the plaques by the front gate, faded but legible. I bent down to check the rosemary near the fence. Overgrown, tangled, still fragrant. Across the plot, a woman I didn't recognize was teaching 2 young girls how to tie up tomato vines. One of them, maybe 6 or 7, looked over and smiled at me. "Do you need help, ma'am?" she asked brightly. I almost said no, but something in her voice, earnest and offering, made me pause. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I think I do." She ran over, her little braid bouncing as she reached my side. We knelt together, and I showed her how to clip the dry leaves away, how to touch the soil and know whether it needed more water or more sun. "You're really good at this," she said. "I've had practice. Did you used to be a teacher?" I laughed lightly. "No, but I did keep a lot of records." We worked side by side until the shadows stretched long across the garden. I didn't catch her name. She didn't ask mine. But when she waved goodbye, I felt something in my chest loosen. Not grief, not nostalgia, just a release. Like exhaling something I didn't realize I'd held on to. That evening, I brought the folder from Linda into the dining room. I set it beside Harold's ledger, the Polaroid from Emma, and the legal agreement now bound in a navy binder. Not trophies, not warnings, just truth, side by side. I lit a small candle, not for ceremony, but for clarity, and sat at the table with my tea. This wasn't the life I had expected after 68 years. But it was mine, fully, accounted for, balanced. And finally, no one else's version of it sat on top of mine. By the following Monday, the house was quiet in a new way. Not heavy, not echoing with the sharp edges of disappointment, just breathable. I'd cleared out the last box from Harold's study, donating his old briefcase to the second-hand shop downtown, along with a stack of outdated financial books he would have called relics with margins. I kept only the ones with his handwriting, in the columns. His notes had become my favorite form of dialogue. I was beginning to understand something. Harold always seemed to know instinctively. Resolution isn't a finish line, it's an atmosphere. You don't arrive at peace, you live into it, piece by piece. There were no new emails from Patricia, no missed calls from Marcus, not even a thin attempt from Jessica to play the victim online. That, in itself, was a victory. I used the newfound quiet to sort through drawers I hadn't touched in years. I found faded menus from our anniversary dinners, half-used travel-sized lotions from hotel bathrooms, expired coupons clipped with care, all signs of a life well lived and thoroughly documented. In one drawer, beneath Harold's checkbook register, I discovered a sealed envelope addressed to Emma. My heart caught in my throat. The handwriting was unmistakably his. For Emma, when she's ready to ask her own questions. I didn't open it. That wasn't mine to read. But I knew what it meant, that he had seen something in her. A thread of curiosity, or maybe defiance, that he wanted to nurture, and he trusted me to guard the message, until the time came. I placed it in a fireproof folder with the estate documents. It felt right there, not among debts or ledgers, but legacies. That afternoon, I took the bus to the community library. I hadn't driven in 3 days, more out of intention than need. The walk to the bus stop gave me time to observe the neighborhood again. The boy who always kicked the gravel in front of his house. The mother who shouted from the porch with curlers still in. The bakery window, now filled with lemon bars instead of cinnamon rolls. I was starting to see the world without distraction. At the library, I browsed slowly. The shelves smelled the same, paper and pine-scented air freshener. A teenage girl sat curled up in the far corner with a fantasy novel twice the size of her head. 2 men whispered over a stack of job listings at the community table. At the front desk, I asked if they still had volunteer shifts available for tax prep season. The clerk blinked, surprised. "You want to help file taxes? Only for the ones who can't afford to get it wrong," I said. She grinned and slid a clipboard across the counter. "We could use someone who actually knows what a 1099-R is." I smiled. I memorized the form numbers before most people learned their area codes. When I left, the sun had dipped behind the corner of the elementary school, casting a gold halo over the sidewalk. I walked slower than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I was aware. For once, there was no weight pressing me forward or backward, no urgency to prove or protect, just a path, and my own steps. That evening, I cooked for myself, not reheated, not a sandwich, but an actual meal. Stir-fried vegetables, jasmine rice, a pan-seared piece of salmon I seasoned the way Harold liked. I set the table for one, placed a cloth napkin next to my fork, and lit a candle without irony. I didn't eat out of obligation. I ate because I wanted to taste what I made. That too was a shift. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hi Nana V. It's Emma. Can we talk sometime soon? Just us?" I stared at it for a moment. Then I placed the phone face down, smiled softly, and let myself finish the meal first. Emma's time would come. And when it did, I would be ready, not with resentment or rage, but with the calm of a woman who lived through the storm and took notes during the thunder. After dinner, I placed the dishes in the sink and walked into the living room. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, in stripes across the hardwood floor. I sat in my favorite chair and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Things I wish someone had told me before they mistook my silence for surrender." Then I kept writing. Not to punish, not to document for future battles, just to preserve what mattered, before anyone could try to rewrite it again. The phone call came 2 days after Emma's message. She didn't text again, didn't prod, didn't nudge. Just let her words sit, as if she understood instinctively that pressure was the very thing that had hollowed out the bridges in our family. I picked up on the second ring. "Nana." Her voice was softer than I remembered, less polished. She sounded younger than 20. "I'm here," I said. A pause. "Can I come over?" "Yes." No more questions, no chatter, just the quiet agreement between 2 people who had more to say than small talk could carry. She arrived that afternoon, alone. No car idling out front, no social media makeup or influencer effect, just Emma, in jeans and a navy hoodie, her hair tied back like she'd done it in a rush and didn't check the mirror twice. She stepped into the house, like someone entering a story they thought they'd heard, but weren't sure they believed. "I didn't know if you'd be mad," she said after I closed the door. "I'm not." She glanced around the room, eyes scanning the photos and furniture, everything the same. And yet "I remember when Grandpa used to sit right there," she said, motioning to his chair. I nodded. He made the seat cushion lopsided. "I've never bothered to fix it." She smiled faintly. "He used to let me crawl into it, with him even when you said I'd spill juice on his shirt. He didn't care about juice." She looked at me, and the smile vanished. "Mom says I shouldn't get involved." "That's wise," I replied. "But this isn't about involvement, it's about understanding. I guess I wanted to hear it from you, not from their version, or whatever gets said online." "Then sit down," I said, motioning toward the dining table. "And I'll tell you what I know." We didn't sit across from each other. We sat side by side, facing the same direction, like 2 women looking out at a shoreline neither of us built, but both had to learn to navigate. I started from the beginning. Not with bitterness, not with blame, just the facts. What Harold left behind. What I found. The signed loan. The missing money. The silence. At the funeral. The envelope at the party. Emma didn't interrupt. Her posture didn't change, but her breathing did. When I told her about the promissory note, she exhaled slowly. He told people he built it all himself, she whispered. He'd go on podcasts saying he was self-made. I looked at her, but her eyes were fixed on a spot across the room. He said you were too fragile to deal with financial things, she added. That you didn't want the stress. He didn't like what I knew, so he reframed it as fragility. That was the first time she looked directly at me, and I saw something there that I hadn't expected, grief. Not just for Harold, for what she'd been taught to believe about me. Why didn't you go public? She asked. Blasted on social media the way Mom always does. Because truth doesn't need a megaphone, I said. It just needs to outlast the noise. She was quiet after that. Then she asked, very gently, is there anything left for me? I didn't pretend not to understand what she meant. I reached into the small file box I had kept by my chair for weeks. I pulled out the sealed envelope, the one Harold had written. He left this for you. I haven't read it. That was never mine to open. She took it with both hands, like it was more fragile than paper. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. I don't know what it says, I said, but I know he trusted you to find your own questions and your own answers. She stared at the envelope for a long time. I don't want to end up like them, she said. You won't, I told her. You asked. That's where it starts. Emma stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about Marcus or Jessica again. We ate in the small comfort of familiarity. She washed the dishes without being asked. I offered her a slice of frozen lemon cake I'd been saving for someone who'd actually appreciate it. When she left, she hugged me, not out of duty, but of choice, and just before she walked down the steps, she turned and said, "You were never dramatic. You were just the only one who paid attention." Then she was gone. I sat down at the table once more, alone now, but not lonely. In front of me were the empty teacups, the fork from the lemon cake, the candle wick flickering out. There was no grand speech, no I told you so moment, just a conversation, honest, unedited, human. I ran my hand across the table's surface, feeling the faint scratches from years of use, the scars of shared meals. They told stories no one could erase. It had taken a year, a funeral, and a legal reckoning. But now, someone had finally asked me what was real, and I had finally answered without flinching. It had been exactly 7 months since Harold passed, when I updated the will, not out of spite, not even because of Marcus and Jessica's silence, which had become a kind of ongoing presence in its own right, like a room in the house that always stayed cold. No, this was something I did for me. After Emma's visit and the conversation we shared without armor, I realized what legacy truly meant. Not the inherited furniture, not the check amounts written on the back of legal forms, but the clarity of knowing who you are when no one else gets to decide. I sat in Patricia's office on a Monday morning, the sky outside flat and gray like a page waiting to be written on. She read the draft aloud as we went, her voice steady and firm. I, Vivian Chen, residing at 24 Grant Hollow Lane, being of sound mind and under no duress, hereby state that I listened, not for errors, but for intention. Each clause was a form of closure, not punishment, just acknowledgement of what had been lived and what would remain when I was gone. We left nothing vague. Marcus and Jessica were no longer primary beneficiaries. The assets were redirected, split between the local literacy fund, the community garden, and a trust for Emma that would become hers at 25, no sooner. Patricia paused on one line. To those who dismissed my voice in life, let this be proof that silence was never surrender. It was strategy. She looked up at me. Are you sure you want to leave that in? I'm not leaving it in for them, I said. I'm leaving it in for her. On my walk home, I passed the cafe where Jessica used to host her brand brunches. It had changed owners. The signage was different now. Earth tones and rustic fonts, no more neon hashtags or Instagram installations. I stepped inside and ordered a black coffee, then sat by the window and watched the sidewalk traffic go by. No one recognized me. I preferred it that way. Anonymous but solid. Present without performance. There was a freedom in not needing to be witnessed to feel real. I sipped slowly, letting the bitter warmth settle. In another time, I might have imagined Harold across the table, poking fun at overpriced pastries or calling the music too cool for its own good. But now, he wasn't a ghost, just a man I loved who helped me build a life I was no longer afraid to defend. When I returned home, I placed the updated will in the fireproof lockbox alongside Harold's, with a note for Emma in my own handwriting. When it's your turn to carry weight, make sure it's one you chose, not one handed to you while someone else smiles for the camera. I spent the rest of the week without interruption. I replanted the rosemary. I finally fixed the front step that had sagged for years. I even opened the old piano bench and oiled the keys, though I didn't play. Not because I couldn't, but because not every instrument needed to be used to be respected. One morning, I got a card in the mail. Not a bill, not a legal notice, just a handwritten envelope. From Emma. Inside was a folded piece of stationery and a pressed camellia blossom, one she must have picked near the church garden where I used to take her on Saturdays. Her message was short, but perfect. I read the letter. He saw me. So do you. Thank you for that. I'm not going to pretend we're perfect now, but I'm starting where he told me to start, with my questions. Love. Emma. I placed the flower between the pages of Harold's favorite book and ran my fingers along the spine, not to remember, just to be reminded of what care looked like in practice. On Sunday, I sat on the back porch with my tea, feet propped on the railing, listening to the wind chimes dance against the breeze. They'd belonged to my mother. Brass, with edges dulled by time but a tone that still rang clear. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the space Harold once occupied with his voice. Not as replacement, just accompaniment. There was no loud ending, no final confrontation, no courtroom drama, just a ledger made honest. A woman who stopped asking to be believed. And a granddaughter who started listening. I didn't win anything. I just reclaimed what had always been mine. And now, there was room for something else to grow. The invitation arrived in a pale blue envelope with a monogram on the front, curled silver script, trying to suggest elegance where sincerity was lacking. Marcus's birthday. A milestone. Again. 41 this time. A year since the dinner where Jessica announced my home was already spoken for, and my name was just a formality they hadn't erased yet. I read the card slowly. It was printed, not handwritten. A detail that told me everything. This was performance, not apology. A gesture sent out to satisfy optics, not to offer redemption. Still, I didn't tear it up. I placed it beside the sink, next to the unopened utility bill and a grocery list I hadn't finished. Later that day, Emma called. Her voice, as usual now, held none of the flinching deference it used to carry. She was steady. I know they sent it, she said without preamble. You don't have to go. I know I don't. I replied. But I might. She was quiet for a beat. I'll be there too. But I'm not going to pretend for them. Neither will I. We left it at that. When the day arrived, I dressed with intention. Not armor, but clarity. I chose my soft slate skirt, a pale blouse, and the sage green shawl Harold had once bought me from a street market in Seoul. It still held the faintest scent of cedar, from where I kept it, tucked among our travel keepsakes. I wore no jewelry, no makeup, nothing that whispered vanity. I didn't need embellishment to prove presence. I arrived 5 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I preferred entering before the show began. The party was held in a rented gallery downtown, the kind that smelled like dusted-off sophistication, abstract art on the walls, faux rustic buffet trays lined up like curated declarations. Jessica was in white again, because of course she was. When she saw me, her smile was tight but measured. Vivian, she said, crossing the room in quick, efficient steps. You came. Yes, I said. I tend to show up where my name is still being spoken behind closed doors. She flinched just enough. Marcus approached soon after, a half-filled glass of something in hand. His face was thinner, his smile weaker than I remembered, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of discomfort he tried to hide. Glad you could make it, he said. I wasn't sure. I know, I replied, eyes steady on his. Emma appeared beside me a few moments later. She had on a simple black dress, no accessories. She looked older than she had a month ago. Maybe not in age, but in edge. The kind of growth that doesn't show until you're standing next to the people who once made you small. We found a table near the side, away from the spotlight, but not in the shadows. People passed, glanced, some nodded. Most didn't know what to say. They didn't have to. The speeches began after dessert. Jessica stood first, of course, holding a mic like it was an extension of her own sense of relevance. She made her usual rounds, tributes to Marcus's brilliance, to the journey they'd built together, and vague acknowledgments of support from loved ones. She didn't say my name. When Marcus stood to speak, he was less theatrical, more hesitant. He cleared his throat twice, spoke about learning, failure, growth. He stumbled on the phrase family values, which told me everything I needed to know. At the end, he looked directly at me for the first time all night. "And to my mother," he said, voice tight, "thank you for reminding me what it means to be accountable. I wasn't always ready to hear it, but I'm listening now." Polite applause followed. I didn't clap, not out of malice, but because truth doesn't always require validation. Sometimes it just sits there, complete in its own weight. After the program, people mingled. Conversations resumed, glasses refilled. Jessica circulated like a campaign manager. Marcus stood still, looking as though the evening had drained something he hadn't expected to lose. Emma turned to me. "You want to go?" "Yes." We stepped outside together, the door closing behind us with a quiet finality. The night air was cool. Somewhere nearby, wind brushed against the scaffolding of a building under construction. Something unfinished. Something being rebuilt. Emma reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said. "Not for them, for me, but I wanted you to have." I took it with both hands, didn't open it yet, just placed it into my pocket like something sacred. "I don't need them to say sorry," she added. "I just needed to know someone remembered how it started." "I did," I said. "And I always will." We parted at the corner. She headed toward the train station. I turned toward the parking garage. But I didn't drive straight home. I stopped by Harold's gravesite. No flowers, no candle, no speech. Just me and the stone, with his name, in the quiet stillness of a cemetery that didn't need to explain itself to be respected. I stood there, with my hands in my coat pockets, the paper Emma had given me warming against my palm. "They thought I was being dramatic," I said aloud. Turns out, I was just being precise. And for the first time, I didn't wonder what Harold would have done. Because I knew. He would have said, "You didn't win, Viv, you recalibrated the ledger." And he'd be right. The days that followed were quiet, in the way freshly fallen snow is quiet, muted, but not empty. There was a weightlessness to everything. Not from forgetting, but from having nothing left to prove. I started each morning with tea and a walk through my own garden. The rosemary had taken to its pruning. The mint was creeping where it wasn't invited, but I let it. It was the most life that patch of soil had seen in years. Some things are meant to expand when no one's watching. I didn't think much about Marcus or Jessica anymore. They had settled into their silence, and I had no interest in chasing sound from rooms that had never truly echoed me in the first place. I suspected they'd find a way to recover, maybe not financially, but reputationally. They were too practiced at curating appearances to let the cracks show. But appearances don't hold weight in soil, or ledgers, or wills. One morning, I found myself rereading Harold's original letter, the one that came with the spreadsheets, the instructions, the quiet trust. I hadn't touched it in months. I thought it might feel distant now, but it didn't. If anything, it read clearer than before. He'd known, in that uncanny way only Harold ever could, that I'd have to carry more than grief after he was gone. And he'd packed my armor, in silence. "You were always the one keeping the balance, Viv. I just finally learned to let you." That line had meant one thing in the beginning, validation. Now, it meant something different. Not a compliment, a baton. Something passed to someone who'd earned it without asking. That afternoon, I received an email from the community library confirming my shift schedule for the volunteer tax help program. 2 days a week, starting next month. I printed it and pinned it to the corkboard near the fridge, right below Emma's pressed camellia and the recipe card from Harold's mother. A life could be made from paper, if it was the right kind. A week later, Emma came by with a tin of cookies and a notebook in her bag. "They're almond like the ones Grandpa used to buy from the corner store," she said. I opened the tin and smiled. They were misshapen, just slightly overbaked around the edges, and absolutely perfect. We sat on the floor by the coffee table, cross-legged, like two girls, skipping formalities. I wanted to show you something, she said, opening her notebook. Inside were pages of scribbled quotes, dates, diagrams, plans. I'm thinking about applying for a grant, she said, flipping to a page marked with a tab. Something for community media, local history interviews, especially women, grandmothers, store owners, seamstresses, people who never got asked about their lives. My throat tightened. That sounds like something that matters. I want to learn how people endure, she said. How they carry things no one saw coming and still find ways to plant something in the middle of it. She looked up. You'd be my first interview, if you want. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew how much the invitation cost her, how much more she was offering than just a seat at a table. Yes, I said, finally, but I won't tell you a story. I'll show you a system. She grinned. That's even better. That night, after she left, I began clearing space in the study. I'd always kept the room functional, files, books, memories in designated corners. But now I saw it differently, not as a place where I kept the past, but where someone else might one day start something with it. I removed the old typewriter Harold once loved, dusted the desk and left a stack of clean notebooks near the lamp, just in case Emma came with questions she wanted to ask here, where the answers had once been calculated in quiet. In the drawer, I left one envelope. Inside, the will, the revised trust, and a note in my own handwriting. This isn't about inheritance. It's about architecture. Build what you believe should last, and protect it like no one else will. By morning, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, tea steeping beside me, light spilling across the floorboards. It was the same table where they once called me dramatic, needy, attention-seeking. And here I was, still standing, still present. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing, not letters, not records, just truths I wanted no one to distort after I was gone. No one handed me the ending. I built it, word by word, deed by deed. And when they rolled their eyes, I didn't flinch. I checked the math, folded the paper, and placed it where it would be found when the story circled back. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like authorship, and I would keep writing until the page was full.